Sometimes I envy Saul a lot. You see, there is no way he could have mistaken God's invitation to him to change his life. It literally came with a blinding flash of light and a voice from heaven speaking loud and clear, "Saul, you are on the wrong path. Change directions now." Of course, that change process wasn't easy. The blinding flash of light was probably terrifying, and Saul cannot have been delighted to discover after his encounter on the road to Damascus that he was blind. After all, he's a powerful, important man, and now he suddenly needs someone to help him get to Damascus because he cannot see. And then when he gets to Damascus, he's so upset that he can't sleep or eat. And then he has to accept help from Ananias, a man who he has come to Damascus with the intent of arresting and throwing in prison. And finally, as we hear later in the same chapter of Acts, when they hear about his conversion, the other followers of Jesus are understandably rather suspicious of Paul. You see, he was a major persecutor of the church. So how do they know that he isn't a spy in their midst? So change probably wasn't easy for Saul, but at least he was clear what he was being asked to change his mind about. He had been absolutely and utterly wrong about Jesus, and he needed to stop persecuting the followers of Jesus. Full stop, about face, change directions, start again. I don't know about you, but in my life, the forces for change are never that clear. It's usually a murky, messy muddle. I don't always know exactly what needs to change. I just find myself faced with a new dilemma that my old strategies for living just don't help me cope with in a constructive way. Or I meet someone new whose stories and life experience challenge the way I view the world. Or even my own inner workings start acting up and I feel this floating sense of disenchantment or uncertainty or longing for something that I can't quite name that beckons me to consider change. I have to change, but I don't always know how or what. And if the truth be told, I don't really want to change either. Absolutely. I understand that change is normal and healthy and heck, even holy. Consider the caterpillar or the tadpole or the dragonfly nymph. They can never reach their fullest beauty if they don't change, and I know that I can't either, but I still don't want to change. It's uncomfortable, and when it involves some aspect of myself that I am deeply invested in, it's frankly terrifying. Scientists have studied this, and it turns out that when we are asked to change a core belief or value, a part of our brains called the amygdala gets involved. And this is the part of our brains that evolved to help us respond when we were being attacked by lions or had to run away from a herd of bison. And it does not distinguish between intellectual threats and physical ones. So if I feel threatened by a change, my body gears up to react as if I was encountering an alligator. Now, in the case of a new idea or concept, or even the invitation to embrace a new behavior or a new direction, this response is probably not the most helpful one. It would make more sense to think about the new concept, and if possible, logically, and to evaluate it, to think about the pros and the cons and the possibilities. Or to pause prayerfully in the stillness to listen for God in the midst of the whole thing. But that's not what happens, at least initially. We react first. We get ready to do battle with tigers, especially when it relates to something very important to us. Now here's another complication. What's a core value for me might not be the same as what's a core value for you. It might be relatively easy, for example, for one person to change political parties because they are disappointed in the policies of a party that they have supported. Yet for another person, such a change might only happen with great struggle. One person might say, "Oh look, I have a few gray hairs, I guess I'm getting older." And another person might be panicked about the same gray hair. Someone might hear stories of what happened at residential schools and with sadness, but without too much struggle, be able to integrate that knowledge into their worldview. And for another person, those stories might shake them to their core and take time and painful work to integrate and accept. One article I read describes this as beliefs held like precious gems wrapped in hand grenades. Now here's the bad news. You cannot stop the hand grenades from exploding. When something that matters to us feels threatened by change, we will react. And when something we say or do, or heck, even who we are, threatens someone else, they will react too. You cannot actually stop that reaction very easily, or maybe at all. After all, it's your body and brain trying to protect you. This immediate, intense reaction is part of the reason why it takes a lot of courage to change. Because if we are on a change journey, there will be explosions. Delightful, right? So for a while, at least, it feels much less threatening to just keep everything the way it is. Never learn anything new or listen to anyone who disagrees with you or whose experience of life is visibly or vastly different from your own. And when your soul starts murmuring inside you that maybe it's time to grow, ignore it. It's much safer that way. It's much easier. Yet this is not the path of faithfulness. As Sumang Kid describes in her book about midlife, When the Heart Waits, we seem to think that God speaks by seconding the ideas we've already adopted. But God nearly always catches us by surprise. If it's God's spirit blowing, someone ends up having feathers ruffled in an unforeseen way. God tends to confound, astonish, and flabbergast. If we are journeying with God, then we cannot avoid change any more than Saul could deny that flash of light on the road to Damascus. It might not come as a flash of light, of course. It might come as the realization that we probably have more life behind us than ahead of us, or as a longing that we cannot quite put a name to yet, or as a new idea that someone shares with us that we somehow know to be true, even if it feels uncomfortable. Or it might come smashing into our lives with an accident, or an illness, or a job loss, or a relationship breakdown, or the death of someone we love. Or it might grow underground for a long while before erupting like a tulip in the springtime. But if we are journeying with God, change will come into our lives, not just once, but over and over again. So we better get used to explosions. We better practice courageously wading in when things are murky and scary and maybe even a little threatening. Because after the explosion, there is a space. A space to pray, a space to breathe, a space to think, a space to learn, a space to grow, a space to become. This is a sacred and holy space, and we will never get there if we spend our whole lives trying to avoid the explosions that come with change, and the fear it evokes when it is real and deep and life-altering. Like Saul, we might find that change sometimes leads to sleepless nights and times when we cannot bring ourselves to eat. Sometimes we might even feel like we are navigating through life blind and depending on other people to show us the right direction. Like Saul, we will probably need to find trusted spiritual guides to help us, like Ananias does for Saul. We will need to search out people who have found the courage to change themselves and who can help midwife us through the process in our own lives. People who can help us to take the scales from our eyes so that we can see anew what it is we need to see. And like Saul, we might have to put up with others who don't quite understand what is happening to and through us, who doubt the change or who fear the freedom we are finding. Change is unsettling, not just for the person who is changing, but for everyone around them too. But like Saul, who becomes known as Paul, we might also find that change leads us to places where we most need to be and helps us to become the people that God created us to be. Change helps us to continue following in God's way. Thanks be to God. Amen.